Hey guys, so today we're going to be finishing up showing you how to solve quadratics. Now, so far you guys know how to use factored form and you know how to use square roots. Now what we're going to do today is I'm going to show you your next two methods. The first two methods are kind of specific cases. These methods are a lot more general, so let's jump right in. So first off, again, part one was factored form. If you notice that you have a quadratic where it's number times number equals 0, that's in factored form, and you can use zero product property, which means that x plus 4 equals 0 and x minus 3 equals 0, and then you solve each of them. When you're doing square roots, that means there's only one x and has a squared. That means you're using inverse operations or SADMEP or whatever you want to call it, and you're just getting your parentheses by yourself. So x plus 1 parentheses squared equals 4. And then after that, you square root both sides. X plus 1 equals plus or minus 2. And then you just solve for x. So we have x equals plus or minus 2 minus 1. And the way we dealt with this was you said, wait a minute, we have two options here. We either have 2 minus 1 or we have x equals negative 2 minus 1. And then you solve for each of them. Now today, we're going to show you how to solve these types of problems. And what we said last time is you can't solve this using your square root method because you have two x's. You're not allowed to do this if you have two x's. So we're going to show you the next method for how to do that. And that next method is solving by factoring. Solving by factoring takes the things that you know how to factor things as well as how to solve factored form and puts them together. So there's three steps when you're solving by factoring. Is number one, you set one side equal to 0. The second thing is you factor, and then number 3, you solve using zero product property. This method does not always work because not every quadratic is factorable. But if you're good at factoring, this is a really quick method. It's a really nice method, and it's pretty easy. So let's factor this out. Now, there are a lot of different ways that you can factor. If you need help, check one of my factoring videos or ask me for help. But I'm just gonna super quick factor this here. So we have x plus 3, x plus 2 equals 0. And then from here, you're going to, you set one side equals 0, done. You factor, done. So now you're just going to solve using zero product property. And that means you're just going to go x plus 3 equals 0 and x plus 2 equals 0. So I have x equals negative 3 and x equals negative 2. Okay, that's your solution. That's it. Super simple. So again, this is really simple because all you're doing is you're taking things that you already know how to factor as well as how to solve using zero product property or solve from factored form. You're smushing them together. Now again, when we talked about solving by factoring or solving from factored form, we said this only works if one side is equal to 0 because zero product property means that it needs to be equal to 0. This one is not. So all you're going to do is you're going to set one side equal to 0. So we subtract 3 from each side. So we have x squared minus 4 equals 0. Now, the nice thing about this is you don't even need to solve by factoring here. Because what you could do is you could solve by square roots because there's only one x. But like I said, solving by factoring gives you options here. So what we're going to do is we're going to solve by factoring. What I noticed is this is actually a difference of squares. If you didn't notice, that's fine. Use quick factoring. That's fine. Use AC factoring. But if you notice that this is a difference of squares, like I said, it could save you time. X plus 2 times by x minus 2 equals 0. And then from here, it's just x equals negative 2 or x equals 2. Again, I'm speeding this up because by now you should be familiar how to use zero product property. So we're just going to kind of breeze through it. And again, that's it. If you solved using square root method, same idea. X squared equals 4, square root both sides. So we have x equals plus or minus 2. So x equals positive 2 or x equals negative 2, which is, again, the same answer that we would have got. But when you're solving by factoring, all you do is you set one side equal to 0. Make sure you do that. You factor if it's possible. And then finally, you solve using zero product property. Unfortunately, that's not always the case. Sometimes if we have things like this, x squared plus 5x minus 4 equals 0, you cannot solve this by factoring because this is unfactorable. No matter what method you use, you're not going to be able to find a way to factor this. If you found a way to factor this, that means you did something wrong. But you're not allowed to factor this, and because of that, we need another tool. And that's where the quadratic formula comes in. So the nice thing about the quadratic formula is it's super simple. It's relatively easy to remember. And it's super straightforward. It always works. It works 100% of the time. For every single problem that we've covered so far, you could have gone straight to quadratic formula, but the reason why quadratic formula is irritating is you need to multiply, divide, add, and subtract correctly, which a lot of people have trouble with, and it's the longest method by far. So what we're going to do is I'm going to teach you the quadratic formula, and then I'm going to show you how to use it. So when you're solving the quadratic formula, it's pretty simple. Set one side equal to 0, find your a, b, and c, and plug it into the quadratic formula. Now, you should know how to set one side equal to 0. So if you notice, for both of these, it's set one side equal to 0. So whenever you're solving quadratics, set one side equal to 0. That's a good place to start. Now from here, we're going to use this formula here. Now this is the quadratic formula. There are a lot of ways that you can solve you can memorize the quadratic formula. For me, I like memorizing it in a song, so I'll be teaching you guys that in just a minute. But you gotta find a way to memorize this. Unfortunately, on an SAT or ACT, there are quadratics, and certain ones you just need to use the quadratic formula. So you just have to have this memorized. So try your best to memorize it. You can look up YouTube songs, you can look up ways to memorize quadratic formula, and there's so many because a lot of people struggle memorizing this. This is one of the few formulas that you have to memorize that's kind of ugly, but we'll go through it. So this is how I memorize it. This is with a little song that I created that I use because you sing it as you write it. So when you write it, it goes like this: x equals negative b plus or minus square root b squared minus 4ac divided by 2a. And the reason why you sing it that way is because it matches the strokes of how you're writing it. Now, it sounds really hokey, but every single class that I've taught this song to, the more they sing it, it kind of just gets stuck in their head. And a lot of times you'll watch people on tests that'll be doing it and you'll hear them humming like, so don't knock it till you try it. Our brains memorize music a little differently, so just give it a shot. And again, we'll just do it one more time and we'll write it out. So again, the tune is x equals negative b plus or minus square root b squared minus 4ac divided by 2a. Now, there are other ways that you could do this as well. If you find a better version of it, by all means, use it. But please have this memorized. So now that you know what the quadratic formula is, the question is, how do we use it? So the quadratic formula, number one, we set one side equal to 0. Done. The second thing is you need a, b, and c. Now, in a previous video, I did talk a, b, and c are standard ways that we can just notate our quadratics in standard form. My a always comes in front of my x squared. My b always comes with my x, and my c is my constant, or my number without any variable. So in this case, since I don't have anything in front of my x, we always have my invisible 1. Okay, remember, with coefficients, it's always an invisible 1. So if we write this out, we write x equals negative 5 plus or minus square root 5 squared minus 4 times 1 times negative 4 divided by 2 times 1. And then that's kind of how you're plugging it into the quadratic formula. Let me clean this up a little bit so it looks like a 1 and not a 5. And then from here, once you have this, you're going to just evaluate or do all the math. One thing I will warn you about, though, please make sure you put parentheses around here. The reason why you want to put parentheses around here, especially if you're plugging it into a calculator, it's easy to forget your negative. If b was negative 5, you'd have negative 5 squared. And if you plug into a calculator negative 5 squared, this will give you negative 25. But if you correctly plug in negative 5 squared like this, you'll get 25. So please be careful of that. But regardless, let's do the math. So we have x equals negative 5 plus or minus the square root of 25 plus 16, all over 2. So we have x equals negative 5 plus or minus the square root of 41 divided by 2. Now, is 41 a perfect square? No, it's not, unfortunately. It's 1, 4, 9, 16, 25, 36, 49. So we skip over 41. So because of that, this is your answer here. That's the nice thing. If you want, you can plug it into a calculator. Negative 5 plus square root of 41 divided by 2. Negative 5 minus square root 41 divided by 2. And you can plug it in. Or you could just leave it like this. This is called exact answer form. And I'm totally okay with it. This is a really common way that you can leave it. Okay? So let's do another one. Same thing. What we have over here is we have 3x squared minus 5x plus 1. First thing we're going to do is we subtract 4 on both sides because step 1 is set one side equal to 0. 3x squared minus 5x minus 3. Now from here, we're going to use our quadratic formula, which goes equals 0. And then let's just label this out. A, B, C, just to make life a little easier. So we have x equals negative 5 plus or minus square root negative 5 squared minus 4 times 3 times 1 divided by 2 times 3. And then you just evaluate. So let's zoom in and do this. So we have x equals negative. Whenever we have two negatives, it becomes a positive. Plus or minus the square root of negative 5 squared is 25. Minus 4 times 3, which is 12. Divided by 2 times 3, which is 6. Now, if you notice, every time I'm pausing like this, you could actually whip out a calculator and just plug it in. Negative 5 is 5, plus or minus square root of negative 5 squared, plug that in, negative 5 squared, 25. Write that down. Minus 4 times 3 times 1, plug that into a calculator. 4 times 3 times 1 is 12, so minus 12. Divided by 2 times 3, 6. So don't stress yourself out too much on this. If you're, again, I would prefer you guys know how to do this in your head. I'd prefer you to be strong with multiplication. But if you're having trouble and that's the only thing that's stopping you, by all means, whip out a calculator and let's get this done. All right. Now from here, we finish this off. X equals 5 plus or minus the square root of. Now what's 25 minus 12? Whoops, let me move this over. 25 minus 12 is 13 divided by 6. Now again, 13 is not a perfect squared, so we just leave it there. Done. Please do not try to plug this into a calculator all at once. Number one, because there's no plus or minus button. That has to give you two separate answers. Secondly, if you screw up one parentheses or you screw up one key type, you're screwed. It's better to do it slowly like this and just solve as you go. Okay, that's the quadratic formula. Now, unfortunately, the quadratic formula always works. It's a little slow, but there are certain problems where the answer is no solution. So this is the last thing I'm going to tell you, and then we'll move on. There are no solutions if you have a negative inside of your square root. Whenever you have a negative inside your square root, that's a big no-no. That means you're not allowed to have an answer. It just means these answers don't exist. Why? We've covered this when we talked about square roots, and if you're having trouble with it, basically any square root of a negative number just cannot exist. Okay, so in this case, we're going to just do it again. X equals negative 2 plus or minus square root 2 squared minus 4 times 1 times 3 divided by 2 times 1. And then from here we have x equals negative 2 plus or minus square root of 4 minus 12. And 4 minus 12 is negative 8. And that means I'm going to have a negative inside of your square root. The second you see a negative inside of your square root, done. There's no way you can solve this. So the answer to this is no solution. And we move on with our lives. Okay, so that's the next two ways that you guys are going to be solving quadratics. The first two ways are to kind of help you build up to this, but honestly, these two ways are the ways that you're going to be using about 90% of the time. You can use both of these in any situation. Unfortunately, with the factoring one, if you're not good at factoring or if you don't know how to factor it, you're going to have to switch to quadratic formula. Quadratic formula is your go-to if you're stuck. All the other ways are shortcuts. Quadratic formula 100% of the time will give you an answer. Okay, so if you guys have any questions, as always, let me know. Again, please try to keep up with this. Please try to make sure you guys are doing well with quadratics. Quadratics are one of the highest priorities when we're covering Algebra 1, and it's such a shame that we weren't able to cover it in class. So please use your resources, use the Discord, ask me questions, make sure that you guys are getting this done. If not, see you guys next week. Have a great weekend.